When the Wright brothers invented their flying machine in 1913, it was a scientific phenomenon. What would they think of aircraft flying in our skies today? Let's fast forward 115 years, and today we see revolutionary airliners taking us to places around the world. We currently have the safest skies ever. Over the last 50 years, the technological advancements in airline structure, navigation, and capabilities have increased safety in the sky. On average, 8 million people fly every day. This is an extremely high amount of people that are in the sky. This next clip shows airplanes flying overhead in America.
2425, are you there?
Check in, 2425, over NOAA.
Russia 2425, start slowing, you're 2.5 fine on RJ, speeds are good, wind 314, gust 22.
We're following Russia 2425.
Russia 2425, clear to land 24 right, wind 300 at 18.
Since 1946, fatal accidents have been on the decline due to advanced safety features. The odds of dying on an airplane is 1 in 29.4 million, and dying in a car crash is 1 in 5,000. So how can you be scared of flying?
So I'd like to thank Captain Sam for coming, taking your time out of your day to do this interview with us.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. So how much initial training is needed to become a commercial pilot?
So when I started my flight training about 20 years ago, I started with my private pilot's license, which is 50 hours of actual flying in the aircraft, combined with about 2 weeks of ground school in a classroom. It ended with a flight test, and that allowed me to fly privately, not with passengers, but just to fly not for hire. When I was finished that, I went on to do my commercial pilot's license. Commercial pilot's license was about 250 hours of flying time, and part of that was doing a multi-IFR instrument rating, which is 2-engine aircraft flying in cloud on instruments, as opposed to being able to see outside and fly that way. That took me about a year. Once I was finished that and had done all my flight tests for that, I was able to get a job as a flight instructor and work commercially. I then flew for 7 years for a cargo company, and then was hired by Air Canada. So it took me about 2 years to complete all my training to become able to fly as a commercial pilot.
So once you get hired at Air Canada, how many hours are put in, like how many training hours are put in before you can fly an actual airplane?
So when a new hire pilot gets hired at Air Canada, the first thing they go through is called a pilot indoctrination course, or PIT course. It's a 2-week course in a classroom, which really just talks about Air Canada, and just a broad overview of Air Canada and some of the way things that we do things at Air Canada. Once the pilot finishes that course, they get assigned to an aircraft, and they'll start the aircraft training course. The whole process from beginning to end on the aircraft course will take about 6 months. They'll start with about a 3 or 4 week ground school training course in the classroom, and in something called an instrument procedure trainer, which gets them ready to do their sim training. So they'll go on to their sim training. That takes about a month and a half for them to complete all of their training in the simulators. There's multiple tests that they have to pass in order to move on. A lot of focus is on safety and procedures, and making sure that threats and errors don't creep into our operation when we're flying the airplane. And so the simulator takes care of all that. We do all the engine fires and failures and all the emergency type situations. Once a pilot finishes that training and passes the tests at the end of that, he goes on to the actual aircraft training portion. This can take anywhere from 1 to 2 months of flying, depending on how much they do each month. And they'll go out with what's called a line and dock training captain, who will, not so much emergencies or anything like that, but will get the student pilot used to flying the airplane day-to-day, everyday operations, and make sure they're comfortable. At the end of their line and dock training, they do something called a line check, which is basically their last and final test. And if everything is good there, then they're good to go, and they become just a line pilot. And so that's about a 6-month process.
Are airplanes technology more advanced than they were 10 years ago?
Absolutely. Technology is always advancing in airplanes every time. we get new aircraft, they're always more up to date. Case in point, the new 737 MAX that I've just started flying is very, very advanced in two areas. I could go into lots of areas, but just in two areas. We utilize GPS now in the aircraft. Most of the airways that we fly in the sky, all the waypoints we fly to, all the approaches we fly, and the arrivals are all now GPS based. It makes them much, much more accurate. It increases efficiency for air traffic control. Very predictable where airplanes are going to be, and so it's much better for them to space aircraft out, which reduces any conflict to safety or any chance of there being any issues in the air. So that's one way. The other way is the radar in that aircraft, the weather radar, which picks up thunderstorms, which we try to fly around because they create a lot of turbulence and hazardous flight conditions for us. The radar in that aircraft actually paints a picture for us on our radar screen. Conventional radars used to just paint a picture that was at our altitude that we were at. This radar now scans both laterally, so side to side, but it also goes up and down. So what it does is it has a memory and it builds a picture of the thunderstorm so that we know how far below us it would be, how far above us it would be. So it's much safer. We get a better idea of how we need to deviate around the storm because we never, obviously fly through them. So those are just two small areas that, but overall, the aircraft's display systems are more accurate. We have more information available to us that again makes the airplane more safe.
The safety of passengers is of the greatest importance to airlines, which is why safety demonstrations are performed at the beginning of every flight. It is not just to benefit the passengers, but also to comply with safety operational procedures for crews in the air. Flight attendants go through annual training to familiarize them with up-to-date safety procedures and emergency situations that are simulated. Airlines such as Air Canada pride themselves on their safety records. It was because of such training that the crew were able to evacuate all passengers safely during the famous Miracle on the Hudson plane crash.
During the making of this documentary, we were lucky enough to be allowed to visit the Air Canada Flight Operations Training Center where Air Canada undergoes initial and recurrent flight training. As you can see here, the simulator where pilots undergo rigorous training is very true to life. Over the years has improved so much that every emergency can be trained for.
You can turn right heading 080.
How has aviation changed since you've become a pilot?
So in terms of technology, I want to say that over my time in the last 4 years as a pilot and early on in the industry, I've seen a big push towards getting more advanced GPSs put into the aircrafts for more procedures and different capabilities that you can't regularly access with your standard 6-pack of instruments. Also, I've seen that now we're transitioning to more online and digital copies of charts. So that can be anything from your load charts for IFR navigation to VFR, VNCs, and VTAs, stuff like that. Those are really helpful in the plane because you don't need to expand your whole map. You just have it and you have it readily accessible at any time.
The airlines of every country around the world is governed by an aviation authority which controls aircraft maintenance, aerospace engineering, and pilot training to ensure the best possible safety for crew and passengers. With technological advancements in the last 50 years, the operating systems within an aircraft allows the pilot and crew to offer passengers safe journeys worldwide. Wilbur Wright said in 1901, when gliding operators have attained greater skill, they can maintain themselves in the sky for hours at a time. That was the beginning of the miracle of flight. As scientists and engineers develop new aircraft and navigational aids, we can only imagine the future of aviation and how it will soar through the skies.